Welcome to AI Paper Podcasts. Today we're diving deep into a paper that honestly cuts right through the AI hype. It asks a tough but really vital question, especially for healthcare.
Yeah, it's called Right on Paper, Wrong in Practice. Why LLMs Still Struggle with Writing Clinical Notes. Accepted to AE's 2025 by Kupferschmidt, O'Doherty, and Skorberg.
Exactly. And it challenges this idea that large language models are just this, easy plug-and-play fix for clinical admin tasks.
Right. We've all seen the headlines, haven't we? LLMs passing medical exams, helping with triage. The promise feels huge. Solve the admin burden, free up clinicians, especially for these supposedly low-risk things like writing clinical notes.
But this paper, it takes a hard look at a real-world pilot study at Kidsability, a pediatric facility. And spoiler alert, it's not that simple.
Not at all. The core issue they found is that LLMs often just completely miss the complex sociotechnical reality of a clinic.
And they boiled it down to 4 key themes, which are super important if you're building anything in this space. First, heterogeneous workflows. Basically, clinicians don't all work the same way, not even close.
Second, systemic burden. The real problem often isn't the specific task you think you're solving, like writing SOAP notes. It's usually much bigger.
Third, autonomy and flexibility. This is crucial. Tools have got to adapt to the clinicians, not force clinicians to adapt to the tool.
And fourth, mutual learning. For this to actually work, both the AI systems and the clinicians need to learn and adapt together.
So the bottom line here, LLMs definitely have promise, but just being technically good isn't enough, not by a long shot.
You absolutely need that deep understanding of the clinical context. And this deep dive, we're going to unpack why these factors tripped up even a really carefully designed pilot.
Yeah, and what that means for you if you're building or deploying AI in healthcare. Okay, let's really get into it. The buzz around LLMs in healthcare, it's just
undeniable, right? Oh, absolutely. Performing on par with doctors on benchmarks like the USMLE, helping with triage, diagnostic support.
Yeah.
It's exciting stuff. And the narrative is strong. There'll be these clinical assistants, scribes, finally tackling that mountain of paperwork.
And that paperwork, the administrative load, from an engineering point of view, it looks like repetitive work, high volume.
Exactly. And clinical documentation, especially structured things like SOAP notes, subjective, objective assessment plan. It seems like the perfect candidate for automation.
Yeah.
The low-hanging fruit.
It makes sense on paper. This is where LLMs are pitched as being truly transformative.
But as this paper asks, can they really handle these tasks reliably when they hit the messy reality of a clinic floor? And that brings us to the case study.
Right. This pediatric rehabilitation center in Ontario, Canada, Kidsability, their goal was pretty straightforward. Streamline documentation, improve services, cut down wait times, standard stuff.
And they saw AI, specifically LLMs, as a potential tool to do that. So they set up a pilot program focused on their occupational therapists, or OTs.
What was the specific task they tried to automate?
The idea was to take the OTs' scratch notes, quick bullet points, memory joggers from a session, and have an LLM convert them into fully structured SOAP notes. Seems like a perfect fit for text generation.
Okay, and who participated?
They had 20 OTs involved in the overall study context, with a huge range of experience, like 1 year all the way up to 22 years. 10 of those actually participated in the pilot using the LLM tools, and 10 served as a non-participant comparison group.
And you mentioned tools, plural. They didn't just use one AI.
No, which is interesting. They tested 2 distinct approaches. One was a general-purpose proprietary LLM specifically, Microsoft's Enterprise Copilot.
Okay, the kind of off-the-shelf solution.
Right. And the other was a bespoke model, custom built for them. This one was fine-tuned specifically on Kidsability's own historical SOE mates. It used a Llama 3.8b architecture.
Ah, so smaller but specialized.
Exactly. They used techniques like LoRa adapters, that's for efficient fine-tuning, and domain-adaptive pre-training to really tailor it to their specific clinical language and context.
And how did they figure out what worked or didn't?
It was a qualitative study. They did 30 semi-structured interviews, talking to the pilot participants both before and after the trial, and also interviewing the non-participants. Then they used thematic analysis to pull out the key insights.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because despite it looking good on paper and having both general and custom tools, the deployment hit some serious snags.
Serious snags is putting it mildly. They found all these layers of friction. Things like formatting mismatches, sure, but also really significant user distrust, workflows just not aligning, and even clinicians feeling like their professional autonomy was threatened.
These weren't just minor bugs you could patch.
No, they were symptoms of much deeper systemic mismatches. things that, frankly, surprised everyone involved.
Okay, so let's unpack those deeper issues. The paper highlights 4 key themes that explain why paper was wrong in practice. Let's start with the first one: heterogeneity in documentation workflows.
Yeah, this was fundamental. Documentation just wasn't this single, uniform process.
Yeah.
How therapists did it varied wildly. It depended on their personal style, their years of experience, but also, really significantly, on the specific clinical program they worked in.
So context mattered a lot.
Hugely. They found a big contrast between therapists working in the center versus those working out in schools.
How so?
Well, in the center, like in the early years or school years programs, clinicians had more controlled environments. They could sit down and take fairly detailed notes, either digitally or on paper, sometimes during, sometimes right after a session.
Okay, seems manageable.
But the school-based OTs, total different world. They're often in busy classrooms, maybe working with multiple kids at once, taking detailed scratch notes. Just wasn't feasible. One participant, PO8, said they worked almost 100% in schools. I don't do a lot of one-to-one treatment, so their scratch notes might be minimal, just memory aids.
Wow, okay. So the input for the LLM is immediately inconsistent. Some have detailed notes, others basically nothing.
Exactly. Yeah. And that difference also shaped when they could even do the documentation. In-center staff might have scheduled time. But the school-based folks, their schedules were super variable, lots of coordinating with teachers, driving between sites. Documentation often got pushed to the very end of the day.
Right, squeezing it in.
Yeah, PO8 described keeping a running tally of things that I need to do in my head. And then by the time we hit about like 1:32 at 2 o'clock, I have to start just doing all the paperwork associated with that day.
So the takeaway here for you, the listener, the developer: if the clinical workflows aren't consistent, your LLM is dealing with massively inconsistent inputs, maybe even missing inputs, and inconsistent expectations for the output, too. It makes reliable performance incredibly tough.
The model just doesn't have a stable baseline to work from.
Okay, so that inconsistency is theme 1, but it leads right into theme 2, which I found really surprising. The clinicians apparently didn't see the SOAP notes themselves as the main problem.
Isn't that interesting? That came through loud and clear. The real issues, the real burden, wasn't the act of writing a SOAP note, it was systemic.
What did they point to instead?
Well, broader workload was huge. Participant PO3 put it bluntly. I don't think it's our ability to write. It's the amount of things we have to do. Another, PO5, who was initially hopeful about the AI, later said, it actually doesn't save me time. Our other processes are extremely inefficient. The SOP note itself wasn't the bottleneck they felt most acutely.
So automating that one piece didn't touch the bigger pain points?
Exactly. And there are other factors too. Clinicians actually took pride in their notes. They saw them as part of their professional responsibility, not just paperwork. PO1 mentioned needing them as memory aids to manage relationships with up to 60 families. And PO8 talked about having a personal voice in their notes, something they felt the AI couldn't replicate. Plus, there were just sheer time constraints. Not enough time for direct patient care, let alone all the indirect tasks. Institutional policies sometimes felt counterproductive too. PO8 found rules about disseminating notes annoying and preferred just emailing parents directly.
It sounds like they valued the meaning behind the notes but hated the process and the surrounding bureaucracy.
That sums it up perfectly. And layered on top of all that was a recent, apparently quite painful transition to a new electronic health record system, an EHR.
Oh, the dreaded EHR rollout. We've all heard those stories.
Yeah. And this one sounded particularly clunky.
Yeah.
Participant NO3 described the inefficiency. You've got the pre-assessment form, you've got a SOAP note, and you've got a consent form that are all documenting the same interaction. Just repetitive clicking, copying info across different forms.
So the lesson for developers here is pretty stark, isn't it?
Absolutely. Automating one isolated task, like generating SOAP notes, it just doesn't fix these deeper systemic problems. You might even be automating the wrong thing entirely, missing the real source of the burden.
Which brings us neatly to theme 3, flexibility and autonomy. These OTs, they're experienced professionals, right? They've developed their own ways of working over years.
Exactly. Highly individualized workflows. They use their own templates, pulled in external resources. NO1 said, we've all had kind of our own little templates. NO2 even talked about how their personalized prompts help to prompt my memory of what I need to ask, what I need to write. That autonomy over their process was really important to them.
So how did the LLM pilot interact with that? Did it fit in?
Well, mostly.
Yeah.
It didn't. That was a major source of friction. Despite initial excitement from some, many clinicians quickly felt disappointed. The tool just didn't mesh with their established needs or their personal standards. PO1 was quite direct. For me, it's not ready.
So they just stopped using it.
Some did, or they engaged selectively. They bypassed the LLM if it felt like it wasn't fitting their specific task that day, or, honestly, if they just felt overwhelmed. PO2 admitted maybe 50 to 75% of the time I was doing it for myself because I don't have the energy to go through and fix this node again.
Yeah.
It became more work to manage the AI than to just do it themselves.
Right. So it wasn't necessarily we hate AI. It was more this specific AI implementation is making my job harder.
Precisely. They showed genuine curiosity about AI's potential. They could see possibilities, like maybe using it for generating family-friendly summaries or personalized resources for clients. NO1 saw huge advantages for helping clients to overcome barriers. But they wanted AI that was flexible, that enhanced their autonomy and skills, not something rigid that constrained them.
Wanted a tool, not a taskmaster.
You got it. That desire for flexibility, for control, it's key.
Okay, on to the fourth theme, mutual learning. This is about the interaction between the clinician and the AI. You mentioned they were open to AI.
Yeah, definitely. They weren't Luddites. Many envisioned AI as a potentially intelligent assistant. NO2 had this cool idea of a smart notebook that could not only transcribe, but also intelligently categorize things. Oh, it knows that this is like a subjective thing, or it knows that this thing goes into the objective category. That kind of smart parsing was appealing.
But the reality of the pilot didn't quite live up to that vision.
No. The core problem came back to those scratch notes. The pilot design relied on the LLM processing these raw notes, but as we discussed, those notes were wildly inconsistent. Sometimes detailed, sometimes shorthand, sometimes just mental notes.
So the LLM struggled with the input variability.
Massively. And the workaround was actually counterproductive. To get the LLM to generate anything useful, clinicians often found themselves creating new, more detailed, more polished scratch notes, specifically for the AI.
Wait, so they were doing an extra step?
Exactly. An extra documentation step, purely to feed the machine. It completely disrupted their normal routine. PO1 said, this is too much effort for me to tell you what to do. I already know what I want to do. Wow. And PO5 was like, if I have to structure it this much first, I may as well just type it into SOP format, right?
That totally defeats the purpose. It sounds like it shifted from being an assistant to being homework, and I bet that eroded trust pretty quickly.
Absolutely. That lack of trust was palpable. Clinicians started over-detailing their inputs, basically pre-writing the SOAP note before giving it to the LLM, because they were afraid of hallucinations or inaccuracies. This was especially true with the bespoke model, maybe because they expected more from it. PO5 described putting stuff into SOAP format only to have the LLM mess it up and have to change it back.
Ugh. And were there actual errors too, or just fear of errors?
Oh, there were real errors. Miscategorizing information between SOAP sections, PO2, introducing factual errors, like changing a note about a child being anxious to stating they had diagnosed anxiety, PO3, which is a big clinical difference, and even omitting key recommendations, PO4.
Okay, that's serious.
Very. And all of this, the extra work, the distrust, the errors, it just added cognitive load and change fatigue. Remember, they'd just gone through that difficult EHR transition. This felt like another burdensome change.
Yeah, despite all these frustrations, you said there was still a vision for AI.
Yes, that's the interesting paradox. Even with the pilot's flaws, some clinicians still held on to the idea of AI as a potential thought partner. NO2 wondered, is it going to think of things that I wouldn't have thought of? Could it analyze information in a way that sparks new clinical insights?
That's a really crucial distinction for you, the listener, to grasp. Are you building a passive transcriber that needs handholding, or a genuine partner that adds value?
It highlights that this whole experience isn't just about the text capability. It's deeply tangled with social factors, organizational context, how people actually work and feel.
So the paper doesn't just point out these problems, it actually uses a framework to help understand why these breakdowns happened, right? The FITT framework.
That's right. The FITT framework's been around since 2006 from Emmenworth and colleagues. Basically says technology adoption hinges on the fit between the individuals, the tasks they perform, and the technology itself. If there's misalignment anywhere in that triangle, you get problems.
Okay, so let's apply FITT to the Kids Ability pilot. How did the misalignments show up?
Well, starting with individuals and organizational context, we saw huge diversity. Clinicians had different preferences, different training backgrounds, varied experience levels. There wasn't one single optimal user profile or workflow. Plus, you had those organizational barriers, the multiple forms, that clunky new EHR. And the school-based program added intense time pressure, a whole different context.
So, poor fit between a standardized technology and diverse individuals in a complex context. What about the task?
The task complexity and variation was definitely underestimated. The core assumption was this neat translation from Scratch notes to SOAP notes, but documentation wasn't standardized. Scratch notes, the intended input, were all over the map, variable in detail, format, even existence. The task itself wasn't as uniform as the tech assumed.
Okay, so the who and the what were misaligned with the tech. How did the technology design itself contribute?
Oh, significantly. There was a clear translation gap. The models, both the general copilot and the bespoke one, implicitly assumed consistent inputs and outputs across the whole organization. That just wasn't reality.
And the custom model, trained on their data, did that help?
You'd think so, but its training data actually reinforced an implicit assumption of what a good Scratch note-to-SOAP note pair looked like, even though Kidsability didn't have an explicit organizational standard for Scratch notes. Copilot, being general, needed a lot of specific prompting to get any clinical context. But the biggest failure across both was probably that assumption of meaningful Scratch notes.
The assumption that clinicians would provide good input.
Exactly. And when they didn't, because their workflow didn't support it, they ended up overcompensating, rewriting, reformatting, adding excessive detail for the AI. They were essentially doing the generation task themselves, which completely negated any potential time savings.
Okay, let's pull that together with FITT, it sounds like. Poor technology task fit the tool's expected structured input, but the task often produced sparse or informal notes.
Check.
Weak technology individual fit the tools, didn't respect clinician autonomy, demanded extra effort, didn't align with their varied needs, and even strained individual task fit, because clinicians themselves had differing ideas about what good documentation even meant in their context.
Precisely. All these misalignments created what the paper calls a trust calibration issue. Clinicians, perhaps initially optimistic, seemed to overestimate what the AI could actually do reliably. So they adapted their behavior to fit the system, instead of the system being flexible enough to fit them.
Which led to that value misalignment you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. The AI ended up touching on sensitive aspects of professional identity and pride in their notes, rather than genuinely alleviating the tedious administrative tasks they actually found burdensome. And don't forget, all this was happening under the shadow of change fatigue from that recent EHR rollout. It was just a lot.
So wrapping this all up, what's the big message here for you, our listener, the AI researcher, the ML engineer, the product manager working in this space?
I think this study serves as a really important, maybe sobering early warning. If LLMs, even sophisticated ones, struggle this much with a task perceived as simple or low risk, like note generation, well, it raises some pretty significant questions about their readiness for more complex, definitely higher stakes clinical applications.
Yeah, it's a reality check.
It absolutely is. The core message isn't that LLMs are useless in healthcare, far from it. But it's that successful integration is so much more than just technical performance or benchmark scores. It's about that complex, messy interplay between the people, their actual tasks, and the technology, all within a specific organizational reality.
We have to get past these idealized ideas about how users will behave or how uniform workflows are. They're usually not.
Right. So this isn't about abandoning LLMs, but about adopting a much more holistic, context-aware strategy for how we design and deploy them.
What does that look like practically? What are the concrete steps developers should be thinking about?
Okay, based on this study, I'd say 3 things jump out. First, build flexible, adaptable tools. Design systems that can genuinely handle diverse workflows, varying input quality, maybe even learn individual user preferences over time.
Make the tool adapt, not the human.
Exactly. Second, invest seriously in clinician-facing AI literacy. Help users understand not just the potential, but also the very real limitations, the biases, the failure modes. Manage expectations realistically.
Good point. Understanding how it works and when it might not.
And third, foster ongoing collaboration and mutual learning. This needs to be a continuous feedback loop between the clinicians actually using the tool, the developers building it, and the administrators setting the policies. It can't be a one-off deployment.
So at the end of the day, it comes back to that sociotechnical fit. It's about truly understanding the people, the practices, the existing systems you're trying to augment before you code a single line.
Couldn't have said it better myself. You have to understand the whole picture, not just the algorithm.
Okay, fascinating stuff. As we wrap up, what's the one thing that stands out most to you from digging into this paper?
For me, it's that question designers and developers need to constantly ask themselves. What is the actual burden we're trying to alleviate here? Are we sure we've identified the right problem? And critically, are we absolutely certain our proposed solution isn't inadvertently creating new burdens, adding another layer of complexity or frustration onto already stressed clinicians?
So that's a powerful final thought, really making sure your solution is actually solving. Well, that brings us to the end of this AI Paper Podcast's deep dive. We really hope this gave you some valuable practical insights into the messy, real-world challenges of putting cutting-edge AI into practice.
Yeah, thanks so much for tuning in and exploring this with us. It's crucial work.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep asking the tough questions.